Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this workshop. I was saying to Andrew just before we started that we've been trying to get someone in for an intro to bookkeeping, accounting for a little bit. So we're very excited to have this workshop today. Um, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew. He's from Sagan Financial. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, I nailed it. Yeah, that's good.
Based out of Cornwall. And I believe Andrew has an introduction to himself all ready to go. So
Yeah,
I'll just hand it over to him.
awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Hello, everyone. So I have a very, very quick one slider, just a very quick intro, and then we're just going to jump right into QuickBooks Online. Um, so I am, as Amanda mentioned, Andrew Seguin, founder of Seguin Financial. So we just passed our 7th year mark, which is super exciting. I never had any entrepreneur experience before starting my firm. My family didn't have any entrepreneur experience. My background's technically nonprofit. So I was a nonprofit about 6 years, quit my job, started the firm, and now we're a team of 13, all full time, all in Canada, half local in my area. The other half are across Canada. So we are a remote and virtual team, and we work with clients all across Canada. Essentially, we are a bookkeeping and tax firm. So we're very focused on technology. We're completely cloud based. So utilizing the best apps and technology in the market to make bookkeeping more streamlined, more efficient, more automated. We're essentially trying to spend less time doing the actual work and more time speaking to the client. It's extremely important for us as a firm to have good relationships with our clients. Whether it's we work with all industries: construction, e-commerce, SaaS companies, startups, tech companies, service-based companies, health companies. So we have a lot of different industry that we work with, um, and every client's a little unique. And what we're going to try to do today is go through QuickBooks Online on a very much sense generic introduction, but nonetheless still hoping to give you some good basic fundamentals that you should be aware of and thinking of as we're walking into the software. One thing I'll say is that, like, if you have a question, please just ask. Like, do not be afraid here. I really, really like, you can use a chat. You can just unmute yourself. There is no bad question. Like, any question you're thinking about, someone else is thinking about it. I've been asked about it before. It's an opportunity for you to learn, to grow. So please do not be afraid. If you're if it's like even a unique question, that's fine. Like, if it's like a very specific QuickBooks Online question, I can probably answer it in 30 seconds. And if it takes a lot longer than that, then I'd say, if we have time towards the end, we can go through that. So with that being said, let's jump into it. I'm going to share another screen, which is a QuickBooks file. And I'm going to move this here, and I'm going to expand it. And I'm going to, just one sec, last thing, I'll move you over here. Perfect. Okay. So can everyone see my screen okay? Amanda, can you guys see it? Perfect. So this is what QuickBooks Online looks like. Okay. So what I'll say is, I'll tell you about some important things. Is obviously there's a navigation bar on the left side. Okay. So on the navigation bar, it's sort of segmented in different ways. There's like your uh, bank transactions. So you're thinking about that in regards to like uh, things that have happened through your checking account, your credit card account, right? There are your sales. So that's like creating customers, creating invoices. Then there was expenses, creating bills, creating suppliers, creating expenses. Then there's reports, which we'll dive into a little bit later on. This is, I would say, one of the most important and probably underutilized as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, is this section here that should be looked at more often. Um, there's payroll, which I won't go through today, but QuickBooks Online does have a payroll module. So if you're incorporated or bringing on staff and you're like, I need to pay my staff, right? I need to pay team members, then you can enable the payroll module in QuickBooks Online, and it'll handle all the calculations for you. So your federal taxes, your provincial taxes, your CPP, your EI, it'll handle it all for you. We do about 40 payrolls per week. We use QuickBooks Online payroll for a few clients, but it's not our favorite product, if I have to say. There are some quirkiness, I would say, for a small business under 10 employees who just needs to run payroll day to day. It's a good product. It's not the best product, but it's good enough to kind of get by. Um, Projects is essentially if you need to job cost. So I would say this is pretty darn rare. So with clients, the only times we would often use job costing is construction clients, I would say. So job costing is like I am quoting a project for $40,000 and I need to track my expenses. I need to track my expenses specifically to that job because you want to know how much you made on that job. Is that job profitable? Should you do more of these jobs? Should you maybe avoid doing these types of jobs in the future? Right. So that's what's called project costing or job costing. And QuickBooks Online does have a good functionality for that. You can essentially allocate each individual expense or bill or invoice to a job. But I would say, out of hundreds of clients we work with on an annual basis, it might be only applicable to 10 of them. So for this intention of the training, we're not going to go through much or at all on the project side. Budgeting, same thing, pretty rare. I would say, budgeting is a really strong tool, but it changes so often to the point where it might be more tedious to make updates in QuickBooks Online than is to have like an external document for your budgeting in Excel, for instance. But if you need to track your revenues, expenses, and compare to a budget, then again, QuickBooks Online does have that capability. Sales tax. Sales tax is very important. So the majority of businesses in Canada require to open up a GST HST number. And you are required to do that when you surpass $30,000 in revenue. So it's extremely rare that you won't have an HST number. I would say out of 250 businesses that we work with on an annual basis, maybe 15 or 20 of them don't have one. And that's not because they didn't do $30,000 of revenue. There's a whole future webinar we can do about HST down the road, but there's some businesses that aren't required to get an HST number. And if you have any questions about that, let me know. But we'll talk about how HST is tracked in QuickBooks Online. And this is an extremely powerful tool. An extremely powerful tool is that QuickBooks Online will help you track what you've collected and what you've paid out in HST. And that's really important because this is an area, I would say, that gets scrutinized by the government, the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency. They look at your HST returns more than anything. Because if you're asking for a refund, right? If you're a startup, you're getting a refund, and there was a good chance they will do a review or an audit. So it's really important to be aware of your HST implications, but using QuickBooks Online to track this, extremely powerful. Apps. So, QuickBooks Online can speak to a lot of apps. And we use a lot of apps as well on our end. So to give you an idea, we use a receipt management app called Dext. You can take pictures of your receipts or electronically forward it in, and it'll scrape the data, OCR, and it'll recognize the supplier, the date, the dollar amount, the HST. So it becomes like a depository of all your receipts. So it allows us to go paperless. That's how we get bills and expenses from our clients. We process like 7,000 documents a month through Dext, right? So there's a lot of information funneling through it. You can hook up Shopify apps, Amazon apps. You can hook up reporting apps. You can hook up payroll apps, accounts payable apps, Stripe, PayPal. There's so many apps that you can utilize in QuickBooks Online that it's pretty strong. Does a Shopify app work well? Is it flawless? So, good question, Lisa. So, uh, the Shopify app is fine. The annoying thing about it is that it puts every order individually into QuickBooks Online. So if you're a small e-commerce business or a small business that sells online, it's not the worst thing in the world. Um, but like I have one client that does 15 million a year in revenue. And before they became a client of ours, they're using the Shopify app and they're putting something like 8,000 orders a month into the accounting system just through Shopify only. It started like bogging down the system, which I've never seen before. It's it's not that slow, but it's slow enough that like I notice a difference. So the issue with the Shopify app specifically is that it puts every individual order into your accounting system. Now, for the first few years, it might be fine. Um, but as you're growing, for instance, and you're doing 100 orders a day, it it can get really annoying to reconcile 100 individual orders from Shopify to a deposit. So there is another app that I would recommend called Bookkeep or A2X. Those are good apps that can speak with your e-commerce channels like Amazon and Shopify and Etsy and Square. We use those apps. I'll type it in. Um, so these are two good apps that you can look at if anybody here is a e-commerce client or selling. Like I use Square and I use Bookkeep to bring that Square data into my accounting system because it can get tricky with that data, right? There's fees, there's different tax rates, there's discounts, there's refunds, there's sales categories. Uh, there's a lot to that, so just be aware. But apps, tons of apps. If you're ever looking to pull data from QuickBooks or put data in, there's a lot of connections that you can do that with. Um, let's talk about the settings. Okay, so I know the settings section here. Uh, there is a lot. Let's kind of go through the most important things. Obviously, it's your initial account settings, right? So, at the end of the day, putting your company name, putting your logo, putting your email address. This is just a sample file, a demo file. So anything I do here won't get saved. But you can put your website down here. You can put your address down here. Pretty straightforward stuff. You might want to look to customize your invoice field. So if you are producing invoices through QuickBooks Online and you just hate the generic look, you might want to click on that green button to customize your invoice. So you might say, okay, let's create a style, right? So you can kind of like modify what it's going to look like. What I'll say is that, and I'm working with Intuit right now, but I've told them, and they are releasing it soon. It's not enough options to differentiate yourself. Like there's 3 templates, then you can do some color differences, some font differences, and some like you can change what shows up and what doesn't show up. But besides that, it's pretty generic. But I would look to modify this to what makes sense for you. Again, there is only like 4 font options. You can only have 6 different templates. You can, though, completely create your own. So for some clients, you can essentially import. They can provide you with a template, and it's a bit trickier, but you can sort of code and modify it. You can. I'm sure you can probably use ChatGPT or something to like give a template, give an example and say, can you modify to try to match this example? It'll probably be a little bit hard to get it done, but you probably could. But I use one of the generic ones. It's fine. Every time I get an invoice, I know it's from QuickBooks Online, so it's not the worst thing in the world. But you can just like modify your invoice to reflect what you want to show on it. So back to the settings. I know I'm skipping through a lot, but essentially a lot of it's not important. It's pretty rare that we are modifying any of these. The one thing I will say under the sales section though is there's a automatic reminder option they can enable on or off. So that's essentially if you are invoicing your customers and you don't want to have to manually email them to remind them to pay their bill. And if you hate that process, if you just hate like having to keep tabs in your accounts receivable and your invoicing and your customer accounts, this could be a good option. We can set up like automatic reminders to your customers. The only thing I'll say is this: you have to be on top of your bookkeeping, because the worst thing that can happen is like your customers already paid you and then they're getting an email that they haven't paid you and they're like, what? Like, I paid you 2 weeks ago. And it looks bad. It just looks sloppy. Um, so if you're going to enable the automatic reminders, which is a great tool, just make sure that you are on top of your bookkeeping, because it is what it says. It's automatic. There's it's if you got paid for an invoice and you did not mark that invoice as paid, and the trigger happens, if it's before the due date, 7 days after the due date, that email will get sent out, and your customer could be confused, could be upset, could be angry, could be maybe they're fine with it, right? And that not a problem. But if it happens over and over again, it just looks a bit bad. So I would just be cautious about this. I personally never enable it, in my opinion. Uh, I never like to have my accounting system do things for me automatically. Like, I still want control. I still want to know what's happening. Um, like if an invoice gets sent out by email, I want to do it. If a bank transaction happened, I want to see it and approve that transaction before anything happens. Um, but the only thing I would modify is the reminders section. And then here you can modify some individual custom fields you might need on your invoicing. So service date, if you're a service-based business and you're like, I did cleaning on April 2nd, and you need to show that in your invoice, you can do that. So I'll enable it and show you what that looks like later. Um, then there's under advanced, that's also really important. I would say, you have your company with your company information, sales, modifying your invoicing, and then advanced. So first month of fiscal year. So for businesses who are incorporated, you might have a fiscal year end of November, which means that your year is from December to November. It's not the traditional January to December. So this is where you can modify that. You can say my first month of the fiscal year is June. So it's from June to May. That's really important. Everyone has to be on an accrual basis in Canada. So that's defaulted to that. You can what's called close the books every year, every month. I do that where once we do your corporate taxes, your personal taxes, and your bookkeeping is done, I don't want any more changes to happen. So I might say, okay, May 31st, 2024, I don't want any more changes. And I'm going to put a password to make sure that no one can make a change. So that's nice. And I'll show you what happens here. Account numbers, I usually like to enable that, just because as a bookkeeper, as an accountant, it's often what like account numbers go hand in hand with the account names. And I'll show you that. Classes. So this is a unique tool available in QuickBooks Online. Classes is like, I would describe them like divisions or departments in your business. So for instance, let's say you do landscaping and you do snow removal throughout the year, and they're just two very different businesses. You have revenues for one or the other, you have expenses for one or the other, and you might have some co-shared expenses like insurance and bank fees and stuff. Classes is nice because it allows you to essentially track your profits and losses, your expenses and revenues by department. So that information is helpful for you if you're like, I have three very unique, distinct businesses, not revenue lines. I'm not saying like you sell three different products, so you can have classes enabled. No, I'm saying like you have two or three different unique businesses that you need to track revenues, expenses separately. Classes is a good idea to enable that. I don't always recommend it. because it does add extra work. But for some clients, for some businesses, it can absolutely be helpful for them. And you can tell QuickBooks to warn you every single time if you haven't assigned a transaction to a class. So because it's essentially, if you enable it, the intention is everything should have a class assigned to it. So it'll warn you if you didn't do that. So it's pretty neat. So I'll enable it for now. Then when it comes to date format, that's your personal preference. I like month, day, year. If you like day, month, year, go ahead and do that. Multi-currency. Really, really, really important to understand this concept here. You need multi-currency enabled if you have one or two of the following stipulations. If you have a US bank account or a US credit card, or you invoice your customers in anything other than Canadian dollars. So, for instance, if you have a US bank account and you receive dollars and you receive US dollars in this bank account for your services or whatever, you need multi-currency enabled. If you invoice your customers in euros, US dollars, Great Britain pounds, whatever, you need multi-currency enabled. If you get US expenses on a Canadian credit card, you don't need multi-currency enabled. So for instance, a lot of subscriptions nowadays, like ChatGPT, for instance, your monthly subscription gets charged in 20 US dollars per month. But your Canadian credit card will just convert that for you. So what happens is that you don't need multi-currency enabled if you have US expenses. But if you have US expenses on a US credit card, yes, like a US dedicated currency credit card, you need multi-currency enabled. So it's bank or credit card oriented or invoicing oriented. So if you invoice your customers in US dollars or euros, multi-currency, I would say a quarter of our clients have it enabled. Like we work with a lot of clients in the tech space, SaaS space, e-commerce space. So they're getting paid in Canadian dollars, US dollars, euros. So just be aware that multi-currency is an option in QuickBooks Online. It's very powerful. It's a very powerful tool. So just those are the two instances where you absolutely need to get it enabled. Okay. There's a few more settings here. So like you can add users. So if you have team members that need to get access to it, and what's nice about it is you can limit what they see and what they don't see. So there is some like roles you can, if you have a virtual assistant or an EA or somebody that you work with that is just doing invoicing, you can have them just invoicing only. If you have a manager who needs access to certain reports, they can look at reports. So there is some customization and flexibility there. You can also invite your accountants, your accounting firms that you work with. So that's how we get access to our clients' files, is that they invite us in as an accountant. Chart of accounts, I'm not going to explain too much here, but this is like the backbone of your accounting, right? At the end of the day, this is how, when you categorize something as a revenue, as an expense, as an asset, it's coming from your chart of accounts, right? QuickBooks will create your standard chart of accounts for you when you create a file. Then you can obviously create your own on the fly, right? You can add an asset, accounts receivable. You can add a credit card. You can add a new income type. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, what isn't is like a transaction happens and figuring out which category belongs to. I would say trust your gut. So it's often, if you don't have an account for a transaction that will happen regularly, you might want to create an account. So for instance, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a construction client and you get a lot of dumping fees. You go to the dump to get rid of the waste, and you're doing that 20 times a month. Well, you might not have initially an account called dumping fees, but you might want to create one because it's going to be a regular type of expense that you're going to be happening in your business. So essentially, if it's a regular type of expense and you're like, I'm going to look for dumping fees, you don't have anything, that might be a good idea to create a chart of account for that. And you go new, and I'm going to create one called dumping fees. You could number it if you have numbers. You can, so at that point you might say, okay, it's going to be in this sense, I might treat it as a cost of goods sold. Like it's essentially cost of goods sold is often direct costs that you have to incur to produce revenue, or it's your raw material sort of end costs on a sale itself. So like if you're manufacturing, you would have cost of goods sold. If you're construction, you would have cost of goods sold. You're a restaurant, e-commerce. Um, it doesn't matter too much for in this one instance if it's cost of goods sold or a generic expense. It doesn't really matter too much. You can obviously ask your accountant, a bookkeeper, ask ChatGPT, ask Google, whatever. But I might say here, I'm going to put this as dumping fees, cost of goods sold. I'm going to save it. Now there you go. So next time I create an expense, I can allocate to dumping fees. Pretty straightforward. Um, in the settings, there's a lot more other things. You can modify currencies, products and services. This is important if you need to do one or two of the following situations. One, if you want to track your revenues by product without bogging down your accounting system. So, for instance, you're like, I have 50 different service lines that you might produce revenue on, but you don't want to have 50 revenue lines in your profit and loss. It's too messy. It's too noisy, right? So what you do is you can create as many products and services as you want. Service A, service B, service C. You can have a unique price allocated to that service, $100 an hour, $200 an hour, 150, and you can have a description that fills in automatically. That's really helpful because what you can do is in your accounting system with the reports functionality, which we'll get to later, you can figure out how much revenue did I produce under service A for customer B. You have that capability. You don't have to do manual calculations anymore. How much revenue under service A did I do in Q4 compared to the last year Q4? Yes, you can do that, right? So products and services is a sort of another layer that you can add to track your revenues or track your expenses. That's one way. A second way, if you are utilizing QuickBooks Online for inventory tracking, which I don't recommend. I do not recommend. I'd say 95% of the time to not use QuickBooks Online for inventory tracking. It's fine for a very much basic inventory purpose. Like if you have like 20 SKUs, fine. But if you have like bundles and bombs and hundreds of SKUs and like different pricing points, I would not recommend QuickBooks Online for inventory. It's not meant to be used as such a substantial product. There's other inventory products on the market that can do a way better job for you and that can provide more features and options to make your life a bit easier. Okay. But products and services is powerful. Like it, again, allows you to track information the way you want to see it. So if you want to create a service and you want that service to be tied to a specific income account, and you know that this service is always going to be exempt and you're charging at $100 an hour or $100 a unit, again, you can do that. So pretty powerful tool when utilized. Okay. Let's jump into the most important part about QuickBooks Online. Okay. So I would say this is like where you will probably be living and breathing 70% of your time. It's this bank transaction screen. And I'm going to spend the most amount of time here. Before I do that, did anybody have any questions so far? Like, I'm not going to like spend the next hour just like navigational stuff. Like, I really, really want to provide you with like the most important things to start your journey or to get comfortable with QuickBooks Online, to get like towards the next level of QuickBooks Online. But before I do that, did anybody have any questions about like settings and what they should do? And because I'm going to like show you the power of QBO in the next like 30 minutes. We're going to like just go through this screen here. And then I'm going to spend a bit more time on reporting functionality because I think that's also extremely important. No? Okay.
Oh, Andrew,
Yeah, yeah.
there was just one in the
In
chat.
chat? Yeah.
Um, Lisa had
Oh
a
yeah, there you go. Yeah,
issue.
sorry. Yeah, you're okay. Thank you. Yeah, for some reason my chat wasn't like scrolling. Sorry, Lisa. I just incorporated. Can I easily change this information to settings? Yes, you can. So now, Lisa, what I will say though is that if you just incorporated, you're now technically a whole new business. So you if you're a sole proprietor and you became incorporated April 1st, you're technically a new entity for legal purposes, which means that you would want to create a whole new QuickBooks Online file from scratch. You don't want to combine your old sole proprietor data with your corporation data because they're completely separate. Okay, so I would recommend to create a new QuickBooks Online file. Depends on who helped you with your depends on who helped you with your incorporation process. If you are working with accountants or if you self-incorporated, there could be some what's called opening entries. But typically, when you incorporate, it's a brand new entity, which typically means a new HST number, a new payroll number, a new bank account, a new QuickBooks Online file. For all intents and purposes, it's a new business on paper, right? Obviously, you will have some history in regards to like prior customers and so on, but it can get more complicated if you have like a bunch of equipment that like your sole proprietor owned. Um, Everything is done except the new entity in QuickBooks. So yeah, so I would just create a new QuickBooks file and you would sort of start off fresh. Is the best way to do it. Uh, Maxine said, finding it difficult to name expenses and allocate appropriately in service industry, no tax, healthcare. So no tax being no HST, right? Um, like I work with a few healthcare clients, so no
That is
HST.
correct. No HST is charged, and it's just finding how to identify the expenses appropriately. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm
So
struggling with.
yeah, so I think that here's the best advice I can give is like don't stress too much about whether an expense belongs to office expenses or repairs or supplies. It doesn't really matter too much. Like, obviously, you don't want 90% of your expenses to go into a generic office expense account. But if there's nothing wrong with having a little bit too many accounts or sometimes a little bit fewer accounts, I would say, you know, when we work with multi-million dollar companies and we might only use 40 expense accounts, 50 expense accounts. So, you can utilize Google or ChatGPT to come up with like your generic, like the chart of accounts that, that QuickBooks provides you with essentially when you start off is often more than sufficient. So, you know, uh, so what I mean by that is like these expenses here, right? So if I'm looking at if I'm looking at the expenses that QuickBooks created for me, and there's not that many, as you can kind of see. There's QuickBooks created, let's see, 95 accounts for me. Okay, so these expenses here from here, right, which is I don't know, let's say 40. It probably covers 98%, 99% of situations. Um, So what I would do, Maxine, is like I would actually probably look at the chart of accounts and see, like, for instance, promotional advertising. I don't care personally. the CRA doesn't care whether you pick one or the other. They're sort of the same. I don't even have two unique accounts for that. Printing and reproduction, I don't have an account for that typically with my clients, just like ops expenses. Um, you know, insurance, pretty straightforward. Subscriptions, pretty straightforward. Um, you know, bank fees, pretty straightforward. So I would say in your line of work, you're probably going to have maybe supplies. So if you're buying
Yes.
any, yeah, if you're buying any type of like medical generic overhead supplies, so things you're not selling to the customer, like things you're just utilizing at the business. Supplies would be a big one, obviously. Uh, if there is a retail component, if there is, so like you're buying and reselling, you might have a different.
We're one of the things we do is we go out and get groceries and we get reimbursed directly from the client.
Okay, yeah. So I work with a few home care clients. So we would use an account called reimbursable expense. What that
Perfect.
is, yeah. So what that is, it's not like an expense that you've consumed yourself. It's like a flow through. So you know,
Yes.
more often than not, you don't make money on this because your service is like, whether it's your home care or your health care, whatever service you're providing, that's your revenue generator. Sometimes there's like a markup for your time, but we use a generic expense account called reimbursable expense because I don't care whether it's groceries or an Uber or a cab, or it's just like I don't need to break that down.
Right.
It just goes into this like generic
Thank you
expense
so
account.
much.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. Good question though. Good question. Um, So I know Maxine already answered, but it really is your preference, MT. There is a desktop version. I just don't love it in the sense of like, I know we're into this generation of a subscription model, which is everything you're paying for is on a monthly subscription. Uh, but, you know, I like being able to access QuickBooks Online anywhere, so on any desktop, any laptop, on my phone. Um, and for the features you get out of QuickBooks Online, I think it's way worth it personally. Like if I work with clients, I want to be able to go into the accounting system while you're in the accounting system, for instance. I don't want to be like, okay, can you make sure your computer's on and logged off QuickBooks so I can jump in and do my work? No, I want to be able to do my work when I want to do my work. I don't want to have to like, and you, same with you. Like, I don't want to tell you, hey, can you get off for an hour? I gotta do some work. It's like, no, like, so QuickBooks Online is nice because we don't have to worry about that. You can have multiple users in the file at the same time without any worries, any issues. And if I make an update, you'll literally see that update 5 seconds later. And it doesn't need to be hosted on a server, right? Like it's already being taken care of. Um, so we use QuickBooks Online for like I would never work with a client use QuickBooks Desktop because how slow it is for me. There's a lot of clicking around, but it really is your preference. At the end of the day, it's completely dependent on you. Desktop is strong. It's a very strong product for very very specific industries, like manufacturing, for instance, is a really big one, and maybe some complex construction businesses. Um, but we work with 6 million, 7 million a year construction businesses. QuickBooks Online, no issues. We work with $15 million e-commerce brands. QuickBooks Online, no issues. And it's actually better because we use so many tools, apps on the market that speaks with QuickBooks Online that doesn't speak with QuickBooks Desktop. And that's the big difference there. So this screen here, okay. Good questions, guys. Really appreciate the question. So this is, in my opinion, the most powerful tool of QuickBooks Online. Like if you're looking for a reason to utilize QuickBooks Online, or you're looking for a jumping start, a starting point in regards to getting comfortable with QuickBooks Online, this screen here will probably be, like I said, 60-70% of the time you'll spend in QuickBooks Online is here. So what is this? What is the screen here? This is what's called the bank feed. It's an opportunity for you to hook up your checking accounts, your credit card accounts into QuickBooks Online. And what it'll do is that every day, your QuickBooks Online file will inject and put in those transactions that's happened the day before into your accounting system for you to review and do something with. So what I mean by that is this. So obviously this is a sample company, but it still mimics like a bank feed. So QuickBooks is telling me in my Visa credit card, I have 8 transactions. These transactions came from the credit card, and QuickBooks brought these in for me to do something with. And there's a lot of powerful automation and capabilities they can do from this screen here that we're going to go through today. Okay. But this is the reason why you would go to QuickBooks Online, or the reason why QuickBooks Online is a powerful system. It's this bank feed screen. Gone are the days that we need to wait until a bank statement is provided for us to do work. We can do work every day if we wanted to, right? If I see this Supplies Depot transaction on February 6th, I know that this transaction did happen via the credit card. I'm not waiting until March to get a statement, and then I got to say, hey, there's a Supplies Depot expense. Can I get the receipt? I can ask my client that next day. I can ask my client the week later. I can see these transactions happening on the fly in a quick and an efficient manner, right? And then from this screen, you can what's called create a bank rule. Now, this is a very, very powerful tool, but you have to be extremely careful in how you utilize it, especially in Canada. Let me tell you why. Okay. Supplies Depot. So let's pretend for the sake, so this is like a landscaping company sample file. So let's keep that in mind. Okay. So when you click on a transaction like this, so what it's telling me from this screen initially is that on February 6th, Supplies Depot had a $24.68 charge on my credit card. Okay. When you click on it, there's more information that allows you to populate, such as creating a supplier. Okay, well, do I have Supplies Depot? I do. Great. If you don't, you can create a supplier on the fly. Let's pretend to do that. So I'm going to click on and say add a supplier. So I'll say Supplies Depot new. Right? This little screen comes up, and I can add as much information as I want. Is it a US supplier? Is it a Canadian supplier? Is there an email address? Is there a name? Is there an address? You don't have to do all this. The most important part is obviously the name itself. Besides that, you can see that everything is not an asterisk. You don't need to fill all this in, but you can, right? You can have contracts, attachments, notes, addresses. Do you track their information for T4A slips, T5018 slips? Those are like tax forms. So there's, every time you do an expense for Supplies Depot, do you want it to default to an expense account? That's pretty helpful too. So there's like, you can expand on this, but for now, let's, for the simplicity, let's create a new supplier. So now I've created a new supplier. Okay. So how do I categorize this? Well, as a landscaping company, I'm going to put this as cost of goods sold, right? I'm buying supplies and I'm probably utilizing all of it in regards to my business. Yes, you can store documents, contracts in QuickBooks. You can store really as much as you want. I would say you might want to make sure you have a secondary source of backup in case you decide to not utilize QuickBooks Online anymore. So what I mean by that is, let's say you decide to use QuickBooks Desktop, Xero, NetSuite, who knows? You don't want to have your only source of storage in QuickBooks Online. So you might have a Google Drive or a share file or a OneDrive. That's what I would recommend. But yes, you can. Good question. So cost of goods sold. And let's say I know that there's HST on this. And I'm not using classes right now. But remember, this is that I mentioned I can track my expense by landscaping. So that's, to expand on it, It means I don't need to create a cost of goods sold landscaping, cost of goods sold snow, cost of goods sold pressure washing. Like I can just have one cost of goods sold account and create a class. So I can say landscaping, right? So I'm going to create a class called landscaping. So now I can track my revenues expenses via this landscaping class. I can add an attachment. So if I have a receipt to go along with this, and I have some like special QuickBooks tools that I can actually like literally ask like ChatGPT what it is. So it's I have a special like extension I pay for our firm because obviously we're power users of QuickBooks Online, but it's really really cool. So, but I don't want to do this every single time. So watch what happens though. Okay, so if I categorize this transaction once and I click add, what's happened is I've just now recorded an expense in my accounting. And I can show you that. So if you click this like plus new button here, this is how you can like create manual transactions. So if you want to create a customer, create a supplier, create a bill, an invoice, a journal entry. But if I click the expense button, this is like how you would manually create an expense. But I will say this, out of so many businesses we work with and so many tools we work with, it's extremely rare that I am manually creating expense. I'm either doing it through a different tool like Dext, like our receipt management tool, or I'm doing it from the bank feed. It's very rare that I'm in this screen, I'm manually clicking on this, I'm manually clicking this, and I'm manually clicking the date, and I'm saying which category it is and a dollar amount, the sales tax. Because in that 5 seconds, in that supplies depot transaction, this is what happens, right? It's populated all this information for you, right? The supplier, the payment method, the date, the category, the dollar amount, the description, the sales tax, the class. It's done all that for you in a few seconds. So it's created an expense account for me. It's created an expense transaction in my accounting system. But watch what happens now. So now QuickBooks is saying, hey, there's other supplies depot transactions here. I think this is what's utilizing its artificial intelligence, its machine learning. I think that these other supplies depot expense accounts are also the same category or also the same tax rate. So, and if I sort it by description, and this is where you can sort by date, description, you can sort it by dollars in, dollars out. You can filter, your dates. You can type. If I want to just look at supplies depot only transactions, it's a lot of powerful tools in this little section here. But this little like highlighted font, it's telling me that it's started to learn. And often what happens is when I do two of the same transaction in a row, right? A screen comes up. The screen's telling me, hey, because you already did two transactions the exact same way, QuickBooks is going to suggest what's called a bank rule. So what is a bank rule? Think of it like an Excel if statement. Okay, so when we're looking at the rule, so I'm going to call this rule supplies depot. And this looks complicated, but it really isn't when you think about it going back to like an Excel if statement. And I would recommend there's a place to pay attention to out of everything. It's right here. Okay. What this is a criteria through an if statement. So I'm going to tell QuickBooks that I want this rule to be applied when money comes out of my Visa credit card. So this is, you can say, I also sometimes use my debit card for this purchase. So I'm going to make sure it's applied to both accounts. Okay, no problem. Then when I'm going to include the following criteria, or called conditions. Right now, I said the description contains supplies depot. I always like to use bank text, and they're often the same, but not always. Sometimes there's like this weird metadata in the bank that we don't see. Essentially, what you see from this screen here is called the bank text. Sometimes the bank text, so for instance, it says supplies depot Anytown. The reason why this happens is under the settings little here, like this is like a bank feed settings. If you click show bank details, there's like extra data that it provides you. I always enable this, always enable it, because I always want to see more information than less, right? So always enable that option, because now when you're creating a rule, so again, supplies depot, I always enable bank text. It's just something I always do because it doesn't always work with description. So just trust me, bank text is the best option. Now, what you have to be careful though is this, okay? Bank rules is a very powerful tool, but can also go astray. So you need your bank rule to be specific enough that it doesn't catch random transactions, but broad enough as well that it still captures what you need. So for instance, I wouldn't want to just go supplies as my bank text criteria. Supplies depot is specifically regarding this type of transaction from this supplier. So this is a better idea where, just going supplies, well, any business name with the word supplies might not be cost of goods sold. If it's like Office Supplies Incorporated, well, that's going to get caught in this bank rule. I don't want that. That's an office expense, not a cost of goods sold. So supplies depot is my criteria. You can also add other conditions like dollar amount. So that's really helpful. I'll give you an example. I own a building and I get charged from the city of Cornwall. Property tax and water, they both have the same bank description, but different dollar amounts. Well, I create a bank rule that is both a criteria of, in this case, let's say supplies depot, and the $25 transaction specifically is one rule. And then my $1,000 a month transaction is a separate rule. So that's important if you work with the same supplier charging you different dollar amounts, and you will need to categorize them separately. It's rare, but in this case, for that one transaction, that was really helpful for me. Then you can click this little test rule. And this is really powerful because it makes sure that, hey, are there any transactions that this rule is going to be applied to? Yes, there's two. So for instance, if I typed in 1, nope, right? You can see it's because I don't have a number 1 in my bank detail, right? You can also go doesn't contain or is exactly. So again, if it's supplies depot, it's exactly, well, that won't work. Oh, and this one does work. But if I go description, I think it won't. Oh, weird. I don't know why that's working. But it's important to double check this. It just makes sure that before you exit the screen, the rule is still going to be applied to certain transactions. Okay. So right now I've said, if money comes out of any bank account, credit card account, checking account, and the bank text contains supply depot, then I want this to be applied. Well, I want an expense, cost of goods sold. I want to assign it to supplies depot. There's always going to be taxed, which I'll talk about in a sec. And I always want landscaping. So now this little rule button shows up. And could you imagine having hundreds of transactions and being overwhelmed on how to deal with those transactions? But in a matter of a few seconds, you can just say, I'm accepting these 2 transactions, because these are rules, right? It's already going to pre-fill all the information for you. And you just click like add, and you are now doing bookkeeping, right? You are now doing bookkeeping. We just categorized 2 expenses in a few seconds. Now, what are instances where bank rules are really, really powerful? I would say transactions that are consistent and smaller in nature. So like if I saw a $33,000 expense, I wouldn't have a bank rule for that. I would want to see the source document. Okay. And speaking of source documents, I want to talk about this real quick, but I'm going to come back to the bank feed right after. In QuickBooks, there's a receipt option where you can upload receipts, email in receipts, or take pictures of receipts with the QuickBooks app on your phone. Now, for the basic clients, this is good enough. For clients to have a lot of receipts and who need a bit more automation, a bit more power, we use a platform called Dext. I'll type it in like this. It's that's the app that we process 6,000 documents a month for our clients. I would recommend to look at a tool like that if you have a lot of receipts. But I just put in a receipt in last night. Okay. So I just took a receipt a subscription that I pay for, and I dumped it in. And then what happens is QuickBooks will read the receipt for me. Now, it doesn't do the greatest job, but it's done a few things. One, it recognized the dollar amount. So let me zoom in here for you. So it recognized this is my total amount. It recognized the tax dollars. So HST, I paid $43.92. And then it recognized the date of the transaction being April 1st. Right? April 1st. What happens is it doesn't recognize a payee because I haven't created a bookkeep. So bookkeep as my supplier yet. So I'm going to create bookkeep from this screen. Okay. And I'm going to say it hit my, let's say for simplicity, it hit my Visa. And I'm using the HST tax rate because that's in Ontario, that's what we're utilizing. And it belongs to a subscription account. Again, if you put office expenses, subscriptions, computer expenses, that's all the same. I'm going to click Save and Next. And what it does, it tries to look through my bank feed. It tries to say, hey, it's trying to look through my bank feed to see if this transaction was charged on my credit card. Obviously, this is my own receipt, so it's not going to match. But what happens is I can create an expense. And now it's in this reviewed section back here. Okay. And it's creating an expense for me with the attachment now in the accounting system. Yes, you can upload the receipt and walk away. Then your bookkeeper can take care of the rest. That's how we work with our clients. They upload receipts and we take care of it, right? Because we know the tax amounts, the supplier, the date, the category, which credit card or checking account you paid for. If you haven't paid for it yet, you may pay for it later on. Yes, and it's important. And the reason why receipts is important is HST. Okay. And so one, I would absolutely, you don't pay extra for this. This is part of your generic QBO subscription, and for the majority of small businesses, this receipts functionality it's powerful enough. Because you can have, 30 receipts here that your bookkeeper needs to categorize and go through. You can do that for sure. Yeah. So you can just take your phone out, take a picture of it, and boom. I don't keep my physical receipts anymore. I don't have my physical receipts. All my physical meals, gas, supplies, staples, Walmart, whatever. I take a picture and I don't keep it anymore. You don't have to. The government does accept electronic documents. They prefer it, right? Because you're not going to lose it. You're not going to spill coffee on it. It's not going to fade like those thermal receipts. After a while, they start fading. It's getting tough to read. So they don't require physical receipts. And this is why this tool is very powerful. And it's really powerful because as I mentioned, HST. So if I go back to this bank transaction screen, coffee, meals, Amazon, Walmart. Like if you go to Walmart, how do I know what you bought? It's impossible. Amazon, you can literally buy anything on Amazon. I have no idea what you bought. Did you buy something from China where they didn't charge you HST? Did you buy a book where they only charge you 5% GST? Did you buy food that there is no HST, but also buying a keyboard with HST? It's impossible to decipher. And this is where bank rules are really scary to be mindful of if you're going to implement it across the board. because HST is scrutinized with the government out of everything. It's scrutinized the most. You have to be careful about applying bank rules to everything. So Amazon is one. Um, it. How do I know? How do I know as a bookkeeper what you bought at Amazon or what you bought at Walmart? You can go to the gas station and buy gift cards. You can go to the gas station and buy food. You can buy gas. You can buy a car wash ticket. You can buy oil. It's lottery tickets, smokes. It's so broad, right? And this is where receipts come in handy. But it's why bank rules have a functionality to make your life easier, but you don't want to lean on it so much. So, for instance, Supplies Depot or like Home Depot or Canadian Tire, Staples. Those are places that will charge you HST 99% of the time. So that's where a bank rule is probably a good idea. But places like coffee, where you tips don't have HST. So you can't just have a blanket. You can't go blanket that this coffee place is a meals expense. That's probably fine, right? But you can't say that this is HST inclusive. Because watch what happens here. Okay, let's pretend I just categorized this expense as meals, HST inclusive. Okay. And then what you can do is you can just quickly go to categorize and you can see all the transactions that you've recorded from the bank feed, right? This is from a rule that I created, if you remember. It's called Supplies Depot rule. But I can click on this expense and it brings me back to the actual transaction. Let's pretend that I tipped $2 I got charged $18.50 and I tipped $2. Well, what's supposed to happen, it's supposed to look like this. So right now I told QuickBooks that there's $2.36 of HST. What is actually supposed to happen? It's supposed to look like this. So $2 is a separate line, $18.50 is HST, and $2 is no HST. So it's $2.13 now. Same dollar amount, it's $20.50, but this is actually supposed to be a tip where there's no HST. So what happened? Well, I've overstated how much HST I paid. Now, is that a big deal? Well, yes. In this one transaction, it's a small dollar amount. You can it's not going to have any issues with it. But could you imagine doing this for hundreds of transactions per year and you've overstated or overclaimed hundreds of dollars of HST? It will happen if you're letting the bank rules go astray. Okay. So I would say be very cautious and very mindful about what transactions you create rules for, because I would say things like meals, you don't create a rule because you're traditionally always going to tip. Maybe not always, but a huge majority of the time you will. And tip doesn't have HST on it. Amazon, Walmart, gas station, at the end of the day, you don't know when you go to Walmart what you buy something has HST or not. You don't know that inherently. You just deal with it as the chart. Like they don't tell you on the display ticket when you're buying things in the aisles. They don't tell you it has HST on it. Like it doesn't tell you that. So you might know naturally, but not always. So this is where receipts come in handy. Let the receipts functionality determine the HST in this transaction, because they would split it. If you gave it a meals expense, it would recognize that there's only $2.13 of HST. And it would split it like this for you. And that's really powerful, right? So I'm assuming this is also applicable to purchases made on Indigenous reserves, tax-free. Yes, that's exactly it. So, we live right by Akwesasne, and, some clients will go across the border and they won't get charged HST. And we don't always inherently know that. Now, we might know it from the gas station itself, but this is where receipts are powerful, right? Could you get away with this specific transaction and not and overstate, overstate HST? Yeah, of course. The government's not going to know that you overstated your HST by 26 cents. Doesn't really work like that. But when you're doing it for so many transactions, and then there's an audit or a review, that's where you're going to be like, oh crap. Like they're going to see that I'm claiming HST on everything, right? All my Amazons, all my meals. And I'm not saying there isn't HST in it. I'm just saying that you can't just have a blanket, it's HST inclusive. So I would just be a little bit cautious about that. Could you apply a formula to estimate the amount of non-taxable tips on meals? So you could, if you're always going to follow that formula. So for instance, what's neat about QuickBooks is you can also create a role to split. So let's just say that, you know, at the end of the day, I'm going to recommend receipts. Receipts is like the most important thing you can ever, like, it'll always solve everything, right? It'll solve the HST, how to categorize, whether you bought this or bought that. But for simplicity, I'm going to show you what you could do. You can say that I'm always tipping 15%. Like that's just generically what you're going to follow. What you can say is that I'm going to split this expense. 15% has no HST, and then 85% is meals, HST inclusive. Okay. And then what'll happen, it'll split that transaction into two lines. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay. So it'll tell you, hey, you have a split transaction here. So what it does, it'll treat the full dollar amount as 15% no HST, 85% HST. You can split it like that. You also can split it by flat dollar amount. So if you're like, again, I probably wouldn't recommend this, but you could do this. You can say, I'm always tipping $1. Like I'm always tipping $1 no matter what on my coffee, and everything else, you're paying HST on. Well, you can do that too, right? So now if you click add and you go to that transaction, you see that $1 is no HST and the rest is HST. So that's also another way. The last way you could do is you can just manually adjust this transaction. You can say, you know what? If I'm going to edit this one transaction, I know I didn't tip $1, tip $2. You can click edit and just change a dollar amount. So, you know, $2. So you can say, I tip $2 and QuickBooks and say, well, you know, based on your split, you're off by $1. So it's red font. And you're going to say, oh yeah, it's because this has to change to 588. And ta-da, now you're 0. And now what you've done is you just manually adjusted this one transaction. And that's fine too, because now it showed $2 and 588. So there's like different ways to doing it. And that's why the bank feed screen is extremely powerful. And think about how many recurring transactions you get per month. Insurance, bank fees, merchant fees. You get your subscriptions. You get your generic supplies. You get recurring subscriptions, recurring expenses. Your gas. So there's so many expenses where rule can be applied to. Just always remember this. If there is a high chance or a moderate chance where HST is a bit wacky or finicky, then you really, really want to be careful about whether a rule is applicable. Okay. But what your goal is, in an ideal situation, your goal is to clear out these transactions. If you cleared out these transactions, by clearing, I mean like you've categorized them, you've like, in this case, right, what QuickBooks is recognizing is like, hey, there's a check. You know, there's a check that we wrote in QuickBooks on December 4th for $1,000. And then then in this case, it's weird, but the Visa, it's because there was a payment made, but the Visa said, hey, there's $1,000 that was received. So we spent $1,000 from the checking account into the credit card account. So we moved money over. instead of creating a transaction on the fly, I'm just matching. Matching is a concept of I've already created a transaction in QuickBooks. QuickBooks is telling me in the bank feed that this transaction did now happen, and I'm just matching these two. I'm not creating another transaction. I'm just matching it. Let me give you an example. Okay, this is very important to understand. From this screen here, I see a parking expense. Okay, so I'm going to say, for simplicity, it's travel. Parking will often have HST. So I'm just going to I'm going to say it's travel, HST. I don't care about the supplier name. Okay, just travel expense, HST, boom. Pretty easy. I just created an expense in a matter of a few seconds, right? Let's pretend that I am going to create this expense manually. Okay, so, and you can. So on January 19th, from the checking account, I incurred a travel expense of $41, and there's HST on it. Okay. What happens is QuickBooks will say, sometimes it takes a few seconds to load. It's been an annoying issue with QuickBooks, but just making sure I select the right account, which I did. Yes. Let me refresh the screen here. It's been a little annoying. Like with QuickBooks, and they're very much aware of it right now. But what would happen is that QuickBooks will notify you that there's already a transaction that potentially matches the criteria. So instead of creating a whole nother transaction for $41, I am going to see, now it's working, right? So it's a loading issue. But QuickBooks will say, hey, instead of creating a transaction from scratch, match it. Matching it is what's called reconciling, right? Whether you create a transaction on the fly or you match a transaction, they're both part of the concept of reconciliation. What that means is, when you've heard the term, have you reconciled your bank account? Have you reconciled your credit card account? It just means that you've accounted for every penny in and out of those accounts in a specific time frame. So your January reconciliation means you've handled and categorized and dealt with every penny in, every penny out in the month of January in a specific checking account or credit card account. This match here, this is what would happen if you put a receipt in and you created a transaction. QuickBooks wouldn't say, hey, you should also now create another $41 parking expense. No, it would say, you already have a transaction in here. Do you want to match against it? So matching it, what it does, it doesn't create another transaction. It's now what's called reconciled. So if I click on this transaction, it'll tell you that there's a banking match up here in this little left corner here. And it tells you that it matched to the checking account. That's important because it makes sure that you're not duplicating your transactions. Let's pretend, and this is why this is important here. I am going to, in this transaction here, I am going to create a supplier, and let's just say it's under whatever, City Water Co. That's the parking expense. Okay. And then I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to pretend I had another transaction for the same dollar amount, but let's say it's gas. So fuel for gas, sure, utilities for $41. And this is from Coffee Place, whatever. So what happens here is that now there's two transactions for $41, right? QuickBooks will recognize that, okay? And it'll ask you, hey, which one do you want to match it against? So again, it's the loading issue. It'll show. But right now, QuickBooks will say there's two expenses for $41. Again, it's important that you are matching to the proper transaction. So if I know that, Coffee Place doesn't charge me parking, well, I'm not going to match against that transaction. If I know that City Water Co. is parking, I would match against that. And it makes sense because the date is January 19th. This is January 19th, where this one is January 15th, right? But this is, let me show you what it looks like probably when it loads here. It's going to say like this. It's going to say, hey, there's two matches. There's two transactions that meet the criteria of $41 and in this date range. Which one do you want to match it against? And from here, I can say, yeah, it belongs to City Water Co. You match it. And again, it does not create a whole another transaction. All it's done, it's now reconciled that transaction. Any questions about bank feeds? Because I know it's like an hour and a half is, I could talk about QuickBooks Online as an introduction for 8 hours. But like this concept here is probably going to be a substantial amount of your work. Making sure that there's proper bank rules set up, utilizing receipts, and matching transactions. Expenses are easy. Deposits are hard. That's where, like, I would say that's more intermediate. So for instance, this ATM deposit for $87.60. Well, what is it? It could be a lot of things. I would never assume. It could be you personally putting money in as a shareholder. Okay. So it's a loan, right? You are, I'll create an account here. So due from shareholders. I'm going to create a shareholder account, which means you as a shareholder of your corporation loaned the business money. So for now, I'll do that. Okay, so it could be you loaning the business $8,700. Maybe it's a grant, right? Maybe you got a grant as part of your business model, right? So that could be income there. What else? It could be a payment for an invoice. So if I go match, there's a bunch of invoices outstanding, right? So then your goal here is to say, which invoices does this apply to? This is important. Like what you don't want to do, and this is a bit complicated, but these dollars, if you create invoices in QuickBooks and you get paid, do not record this deposit as sales. This is like the biggest no-no that I see in, like, I would say the most common mistake I'll see in QuickBooks file that I jump in to help clean up is this. So let's pretend I'm going to create an invoice for $87.60. Okay. I'm just going to pick a random customer. I'm going to create an invoice on December 1st. And I'm just going to put down catering for $87.60. Okay. Boop. I've saved it. Okay. QuickBooks will recognize that, hey, you have an invoice outstanding for the same dollar amount. Does this payment apply to this invoice? Yeah. Well, watch what happens. And this is very powerful. Okay. This is like extremely, extremely important. Right now, this invoice is outstanding in QuickBooks. I'm owed $87.60. Well, if I tell QuickBooks from this bank deposit that this matches against this invoice, if I refresh this screen, this invoice is not outstanding anymore. It's been paid. And it tells me when and how it was paid. It was paid with a checking account on January 31st from this ATM deposit. Cool. Perfect. Let's pretend, though, and this will happen, let's pretend that this payment is regarding two invoices, an $8,000 invoice and a $760 invoice. Watch what happens now. Okay, so I'm going to say 8,000, and I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to say 760. QuickBooks won't recognize that there's a, so it's just, again, loading. So QuickBooks won't recognize that from that screen, there's a payment belonging to two invoices. So I'm pretty sure I already deleted this invoice. Okay, I didn't, that's why, sorry. So let's delete this. No, that QuickBooks is acting so stupid right now. Because it's like I gotta create another invoice. Because it was like a loading issue and so again, let's go here, that 8,000. Let me make it inclusive of tax. Okay, let's try this again. As I was saying, so QuickBooks won't recognize from this screen that there's actually two invoices it belongs to. So what people often do is this. They will say, oh, it's just for sales. So they'll just this money's coming in, it's sales, HST inclusive. Okay, and they'll create it. But what's happened now is you've duplicated your revenue, right? You have two invoices you've already created as sales. Then you also just now add another sales transaction. What you're supposed to do is you click on it and you click match. And then what QuickBooks will do, it'll use AI / just like logical deduction to say, hey, there's two invoices that total up to the same dollar on this deposit. We think, or we suggest, that this deposit belongs to these two invoices. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, right? In this case, I know that I deposit a check or two checks at the ATM on January 31st for these two invoices. And what happens is when you match it, you're not creating another sale entry. You're just taking a payment on those invoices. And now those invoices have been marked as paid. Those are extremely important to be aware of, which is, I say expenses and bills are the easiest part. You can do rules and receipts. You can like categorize it. It's pretty intuitive. Meals, travel, gas, office expenses, repairs, subscriptions, bank fees. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's the money in that I see the most issues. The money out is issues because people are overstating HST. They're like, oh, Airbnb, HST inclusive. It's like, actually, no. If you went to an Airbnb and outside of Canada, there is no HST. Or they might have not charged you HST. Or maybe, in British Columbia, you go to BC, it's not GST HST, it's GST PST. So there's a lot of nuance with that. Traveling too. Like if you take a flight to, Europe, there's no HST on that transaction. Or there might be like a few dollars worth because of your baggage claim. So I would say for expenses, be extremely aware of HST rules. For deposits, my biggest piece of advice is try to figure out where is your revenue source coming from. Are you creating invoices manually in QuickBooks? If so, you should hardly ever take a deposit and treat it as sales. The deposit should be matching against those invoices that you've already created. Some deposits are unique, like a loan, or you gotten a grant or a subsidy. That's fine. You just mark that from here. So you can say, again, $480 came from the shareholder. And there's no taxes on that. Boom. Done. But this deposit, again, was it a grant? Was it payments related to an invoice you've already created in QuickBooks? Some clients, I don't recommend this, some clients will treat the deposit as revenue. Like they don't create invoices in QuickBooks, they create it elsewhere. And then money comes in, they treat it as sales. The problem with that is that you're assuming that they're always paying you the right amount. And it's called cash basis accounting. What that means is you're recording transactions as cash is actioned. But in reality, this invoice here, if I invoice this customer in December 2024 for $1,800, the revenue belongs in December. It doesn't belong in January. So if I go from here and I say this is sales, right, HST inclusive, I'm now recording the sale in January. I'm not recording in December. And that's a problem. It's not a huge deal with small businesses, but the CRA wants you to run on what's called an accrual basis. Very quickly, it's time to always friggin' flies by. All this hard work that you're doing is now in like 100 different reports for you to access. The most important ones for sure is your profit and loss and your balance sheet. This profit and loss is extremely important. It will tell you all the necessary important information you've done, your revenues, your expenses, your margins, your net profit. And then you can drill down. You're like, oh, that's weird. I had $1,200 of interest expenses this year so far. You can click on it and it'll show you every single transaction that makes up that figure. Right? That's really powerful. Right? Because then you can click on a transaction and be like, oh, weird. I don't remember this transaction. Oh, there's 2 February transaction. That's weird. And you can click on it and look at it and fix it. So there's like so much capability from this screen here. You can compare to the previous year. You can do a percentage change, a dollar change. You can compare to month over month. If you want to look at this whole year broken down by month, and you can see what your revenues are per month and expense, you can do that. You can click on this button and it'll give you your travel expenses, your rent expenses just for the month of June. So much. Like I can do a whole another hour and a half on the reports in QuickBooks Online. Like it's like that's how much is available when it comes to reports here. But these 2 reports are your best friends: balance sheet and profit and loss. If any, if you're looking for investment, if you're looking to do financials, if you're looking to do a corporate tax return, a personal tax return, those 2 reports are the most important reports that you can provide. Obviously, it's important to make sure that it's as clean as possible. When I say clean, as in like, and that's why you work with a bookkeeper and an accountant, right? Like, I'll give you an example. A third of our clients, they'll do their own bookkeeping. We're here for support. So like they have questions, we'll make a video for them for training purposes. We'll help them resolve a specific unique transaction. And then once a year, we clean up what they've made and messed up on. So for instance, sometimes they don't know that there's HST in ChatGPT. It's like, oh, it's a US transaction. There's no HST. Actually, there is. Or there's the 407 ETR. There's no HST on that. People think there is HST on that. So there's all these little nuances that we can come in and do a big cleanup. Instead of us doing all the bookkeeping from scratch for a whole year, you're doing all the work. You're doing all the hard work. We come in, we spend a few hours, clean it up, and make sure it's more presentable and more accurate. And that works well too with our clients. So find a bookkeeper, find an accountant that can like work well with you. But this is a very, very powerful tool. Be able to access your accounting on your phone, on your laptop, on your computer, having multiple users logged in at the same time. Very powerful, very important. It's amazing stuff. All right. Any questions? I know that was an hour and a half flew by, Amanda. It's always fun.
Yeah, that was really great, and I think you had a lot of good questions along the way as well. And we are always open to having you back. So if people do want like a second workshop, we're happy to help facilitate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's tons. If you guys are interested, reach out to Amanda and the Queen's U team. So, I've done different webinars on different topics. I've done HST topics, personal tax topics, corporate tax, how to love bookkeeping a bit more, so a bit further. There's so much, but I would say, guys, don't be so overwhelmed. I think like as you get used to and comfortable, I think it's important to find somebody who meets your persona, your personality, or your aura with a judge-free zone. Like you being as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you're going to inherently suck at a few things. Simple as that. So it's okay to like not be so good at bookkeeping, but wanting to get better. That's great. That's amazing. So, it takes time. Maybe find somebody or work with somebody who can like handle hold you a little bit or provide you with guidance and support and recommendations. It really is a journey at the end of the day. And bookkeeping will be just, you won't just know it overnight. It'll take some time, but you can probably do a good majority of the work yourself with like the fundamentals that I've sort of brought on. Obviously, there's a bit more complicated things like I bought a vehicle and I traded in my old vehicle, and it's like, yeah, that's complicated. Like that's not something you can just figure on your own. But your expenses, your bills, your income, I think it's for sure you can do that through QuickBooks Online.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And for anybody who's still in the session, we'll probably be following this up with kind of like a little feedback form. We'd like to know kind of if you would like to have another workshop, if you have any sort of questions or topic suggestions that you would like to see going from here, by all means, put that in our feedback form, and then we can follow up. But this was really great overview. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us this morning. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. And thanks for
Um,
having me.
yeah. All right.
Great.
Thank you.